Good morning, dear ladies, dear gentlemen. It's a pleasure to start the third day of Symposium on Cultural Diplomacy. And at the very beginning, please let me thank to Mr. Donfried, the director of the Institute for Cultural Diplomacy, for giving me this chance to present the research I'm trying to contribute to come up maybe with new ideas and new inspiration for you. I would like to start with what I mentioned yesterday when they asked me, what is cultural diplomacy? And I started to say that prejudices come from fear from unknown. Because when you don't know, you are fear of other cultures, of other nations. And culture is important here to open our eyes, to understand. And because of this, because of my love for cultures, I decided not to study cultures, but to study diplomacy, the tool how to spread the cultures, how to contribute to intercultural dialogue. This presentation is not going to be directly on cultural diplomacy, but to show you how we can contribute to cultural diplomacy, how we really can improve the dialogue. I picked the impact of the European External Action Service because it's the new diplomatic body on the international plane, and I believe that there might be new opportunities for diplomacies. I focused on diplomacies of small EU member states because I believe that they are more constrained because of the financial resources of human resources. And at the beginning of my research, I used the question which I already asked His Excellency Vitalis, Ambassador of New Zealand, of the Kissinger, but not in the sense of can we call. Is there the number which we can call when we want to speak to Europe? But I asked differently. If small states of the EU would call the EEAS, if they would call the EU, can they rely that they will get an answer or not? That's why at the beginning, it's important to define small states. There are academic researches on that which normally rely on the quantitative elements of population, of territory, of GDP, of votes in the Council of the European Union, or qualitative elements. And I decided to pursue a real research on what I believe, and that's the real diplomatic power. To focus on their diplomats, to focus on the amount of embassies, on the national missions, to see if they are really and how much they are constrained in these financial terms. Let's start with, for example, national missions. This is of Dr. Emerson. It's the academic research who compared the national missions of the member states together with the European External Action Service. National missions here means the embassies, the permanent missions, permanent representations, the consulates, as well as general consulates. And based on the communication with all the ministries of foreign affairs in the EU, and based on the answers of those who replied to me, I compare it to the number of embassies in order to show you what is the representation of small member states to the big member states. What are the options? And here I think it's important to see that the number of the embassies is often similar to national missions, what means that small EU member states basically have to also do consular affairs by their diplomats and other works by the diplomats. Yes, so you can see that the number of embassies is not so huge. Then, based on the figure of budget expenditure, you can see how much they're able to finance and their running expenditures. It doesn't include the development aid. It's a number of the running expenditures. You can see that the European External Action Service is basically in all the levels similar to the representation of Netherlands. When we can come further, I found this the most interesting for me, and that's the personal capacity of ministries. Now you can see the total amount of staff to own nationals, what also shows the ability of bigger states to employ the external staff, what's also important to get the knowledge of the country where they actually are represented. And this is my beloved model, which shows the number of diplomats, because I believe the diplomat is a human factor of diplomacy. Diplomat on the ground, because they're posted diplomats, they are those who organize the festival, they are those who are sitting here and giving the lecture, and they are those who basically really implement the cultural diplomacy or the other conduct of foreign policy on the ground. And you can see that often the number of diplomats in small states is very similar to external staff to small states, what shows, again, the overburden of diplomats with other activities without the diplomatic agenda. Here, this is basically the same graph, but the external staff is included, so you see the number of posted diplomats to total number of of people of personnel at the Ministries of Foreign Affairs. I added honorary consuls because it's nowadays very important for small states to further improve the name. It's important to say honorary consuls are not the employees of Ministries of Foreign Affairs. They are the personnel who love the country. For example, when I was in Malta, there was Mr. Bencini, Maltese, who loved Slovakia, who had a huge relationship with Slovakia throughout the life, and he was appointed as honorary consul to spread goodwill of Slovakia. It's an unpaid function. That's why for a small state it's important, and they're trying to have as many honorary consuls as possible. I picked Slovakia not only because I am Slovak and I love Slovakia and I would love to become a diplomat of Slovakia. And on this note, I send many greetings to Ministry of Foreign Affairs and European Affairs of Slovakia to camera, in case they watch it here. I will be soon available on the labor market. And I picked it also because Slovakia is a small state. It's also restricted with finances, but it didn't go through such a terrible economic crisis, even though, as you could see yesterday, the amazing sustainable growth which was happening after the EU accession is cut down. But I believe Slovakia is a good example of small state who has potential, who has the will. We had tough beginnings when we split it up in 1993. And at the beginning, we even have to establish a belief in the state. Then we had to establish the belief in the EU, and the EU became our goal as well as the tool of diplomacy. And I would say that it's 2 decades. 2 decades is not a lot for diplomacy. Diplomacy in France, as we'll hear, is established for centuries. Slovakia has 2 decades. I'm 22. I can say 2 decades is not a lot to catch up with everything. And that's why I picked Slovakia. And there are sectoral changes. At the beginning, we were focusing to simply say that Slovakia exists. Nowadays, we are focusing on cultural diplomacy, on economic diplomacy, and public diplomacy. And I believe these elements are very interconnected. While economic diplomacy nowadays is very important, and our Minister of Foreign Affairs, Mr. Lajčák, is trying to integrate economic diplomats and to put them, we have 42 economic diplomats, and put them on the most important spaces in order to bring benefits for Slovakia. Public diplomacy is nowadays very popular to spread the name, the brand. We are trying to bring the brand of Slovakia to point out on our beauty of nature, on our space, and on the beauty in Slovakia. And cultural diplomacy is again interconnected, which enables us by culture, by showing the culture, to improve the knowledge about Slovakia. However, we are trying to do our best, but we have to look at the realities. Currently, we have around 1,100 staff at the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, 375 posted diplomats, 63 embassies, 8 cultural institutes representing culture. When we look at the average, 60% of our embassies have 1 to 3 personnel. And 13% of them has 1 diplomat, 38% have 2 diplomats. It's not 100 because I excluded the rest. There is 10% for diplomats up to number 9. And then there are certain, especially permanent representations, which have more than 19. However, it's visible how little staff and how little diplomats we have at the embassies. We have 45 mini embassies. What's the embassy when there are 1 to 2 diplomats? And this is very interesting when you compare it with the average activity at the diplomatic mission. Because there is approximately 30% of the work which is diplomatic work, and then you have a huge consular work and administrative work. And when you realize that there is 1 diplomat or 1 to 3 personnel, it shows a huge overburden of diplomats with other activity, which prevents to focus on our goals, to focus on cultural diplomacy, to focus on organizing festivals. I don't know if you haven't been here, but there was amazing Czech festival, Czech street party recently in Brussels. There was beer for free, there was music, and I think there was amazing spread of culture diplomacy. And it was organized by the permanent representation, and there was the permanent representative. But for this, the diplomat has to have a time and the finances. Why European External Action Service? European External Action Service is a new diplomatic body, as I said. It was launched in 2010 after 1 year after the ratification of the Lisbon Treaty. It has similar structure on the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, and it has the headquarters in Brussels and 140 delegations abroad, who are supposed to cooperate with embassies who are implementing the foreign policy. I was focusing in my research on more stuff. However, here I decided to focus on cooperation between EU delegation and member states' embassies to show you where is the chance to improve the work of national diplomacy. Just for your interest, I show you my calculations of recruitment of diplomats to the EEAS to posted diplomats. They're of small states. Let's pick the Denmark. For example, it has posted diplomats 522, while there are 6 diplomats for the EEAS, what makes 1%. What not a lot. They're trying, small member states want to have representation in the EU and the EEAS. I focus on cooperation, and here I think it's very important to mention guidelines for the EU cooperation in third countries, who are non-binding guidelines, who were accepted under Polish presidency, and improved the communication between EU delegation and embassies, exchange of information, activities, joint activities, especially. And there should be there was installing the new communication system was installed in order to improve the safe communication. Just very briefly, I'm already soon running out of the time, so I'll mention just example how the cooperation looks like, for example, in Lebanon, which is based on the report of the EU delegation as well as the report of our ambassador. In Lebanon, there are 16 resident states, what means they have embassies there, and in cooperation with EU delegation, they have 9 working groups, what means that head of delegations as well as deputies as well as other levels are meeting in order to improve, in order to discuss and exchange ideas. But there are also regular newsletter, where is the space to publish the activities of member states. They want to have the joint website and social media, so the communication between the EU delegation and member states is improving. In Azerbaijan also, it was reported that there is a huge exchange of personal info, the reporting and exchange of information. Slovakia and the EEAS. I already introduced Slovakia, and I would just mention that Slovakia is really trying to have diplomats as well as nationals in the EU institutions, in the EEAS. After the establishment of the EEAS, we set up Diplomatic Academy. We had preparation courses for diplomats in order to improve knowledge. And we also made a database, for example, of potential candidates who can become diplomats of the EEAS. We are very proud that our current Minister of Foreign Affairs, but he was not at that time, he was appointed by Catherine Ashton as managing director for Russia and the Western Balkans. It was very, very high function because there are 6 managing directors who are focusing on geographical issues. And we're in strong support, as well as other small states, to have 1/3 of the staff in the EEAS from the member states in order to secure our representation. Just very briefly, we have bigger ambitions. We wanted to have 14 to 17 nationals in the EEAS. We have currently 9. One is head of delegation in Libya, our ambassador. And the recruitment showed the lack of managerial knowledge, the lack of skills in financial management. What's kind of comparative disadvantage, because simply diplomats for small EU member states cannot really handle the same amount of the money at their embassies as diplomats in Germany, so it's more the realistic problem. But also the lack of French was interesting, that we should actually improve the French of our diplomats in order to increase their chance to be employed. We learned a lot because we were lucky to become a part of Consultative Committee on Appointments, which is a committee consisting of the member states, as well of some member states, 2 member states, as well as the EU institutions, who are choosing the people for the EEAS. And based on this, we gained the insight, we gained the understanding what's important. And I would like to mention also the important experience of the Minister of Foreign Affairs. Mr. Lajčák left the function and came back as the Minister of Foreign Affairs. And I was reported by the communication with the ministry that there are changes, that suddenly the ministry is fresher, suddenly there is new spirit, suddenly we are more focusing on the EU, and there's new spirit, which I think is very important, which is coming by this exchange of diplomats, new experience. The cooperation, which I think is very interesting, and this is the most important, I think I want to say, I will be finishing soon, good morning, and that's the evaluation reports which were in 2011 and 2012. In 2011, we got the reports. We got the reports from our ambassadors all over our embassies, reported on the cooperation with EU delegation, on the meetings with head of missions, exchange of information, coordination of position, and common statements. And then after implementation of guidelines I mentioned, there were new evaluations. In general, they saw the improvement in one or more areas. And if there were problems, they were mainly bureaucratic or the problem of lack of safe communication, which Edward Snowden would probably support it. So just a little example. For example, in Canada, before they pointed lack of meetings, little exchange of information, coordination of position was weak. After the implementation of guidelines, the improvement really happened. There was better cooperation between EU delegation, better exchange of information, and especially activities, joint activities, and monitoring of local media. Israel, there was also improvement, especially in reporting, even though they mentioned the lack of information. However, what's important, and it's in general, and I will very soon finish, the fact that ambassadors evaluated that there is a change. There is a change there might be a change in the work because of the potential, but there is not systematic change in their real work. What I think there is the space for activity. Nairobi was absolutely inadequate, while Australia, there were lectures held by the ambassadors, so the activity was actually pretty well. Personalities matters. Personalities matters. In Mexico, there was a very good head of delegation who coordinated a lot with all the member states. While in Russia, they, for example, mentioned the lack of Russian, the ability to speak Russian would decrease the chance of negotiation with the authorities. What I wanted to say is that there is new space. The European External Action Service is a reality. It's here. And we can there are thousands of critical evaluations which are probably right, but it is here. And we are small EU member states who want to do more, who want to contribute to cultural diplomacy. And we shouldn't simply close eyes in front of this just because we are scared or just because we are not used to. We are often nowadays mentioned, think out of the box. And it often applies for the business, for the advertisement, but we should think out of the box when it comes to institutions. And because of this, I believe that there should be more evaluations. I showed you the positive and negative examples in order to show you that we should evaluate. There should be communication. Everything the Ministry of Foreign Affairs should communicate with the embassies to find out. And that's why I consider this to be a challenge for national missions, for ministries. And we can either close eyes or we can simply accept the challenge. And on this note, I will thank you. But I would like to ask if you have any questions, please don't hesitate to ask me. But even if you have comment, even if you have idea, if you have critical evaluation, what you just saw, please tell me. And please don't accept it as a lecture. I just wanted to inspire you and to bring a new inspiration for thinking, even in case of diplomacy. Thank you very much.